Hello and welcome to your first class on internal security. Today we're going to cover two topics from internal security. Number one is going to be the linkage between extremism and development, and the second topic will be the role of external state and non-state actors in internal security and threats emerging from these agents. So before we begin, we must first understand what exactly is internal security. Firstly, it is part of your GS3 paper, so it has a good weightage. It comes every year, both has a 10 marker and 15 marker questions. You can see the weightage of internal security in recent years. And what you'll observe is that every year there is at least 55 to 60 marks of the weightage of the GS3 paper, which comes from internal security. Internal security is also highly linked with your GS2 papers, especially the international relations part and some part from geography and geopolitics. So all these topics, again, GS in today's day and time for your mains exam is highly interlinked. You never know which aspect of which subject might be useful in which paper. It might be asked as a question in ethics paper also. For example, a few years back, there was a question on comprehensive national power, which is actually an element of national security. So all these things are interusable, interchangeable, and you are expected to use them in one or the other paper across all your GS papers or maybe in your optional paper as well. So the basic understanding we have to create regarding the topics is understanding the theoretical frameworks, the trends of the questions that have been asked, and having some ready-made data, ready-made introductions, ready-made quotes, ready-made diagrams available or flowcharts available, which can help you answer your question and write a good answer. The target right now is not to understand everything, but just have crisp definitions, crisp data, crisp types, subtypes, and the various examples or case studies that you can quote or the strategies you can quote to counter the internal security threats, whatever is asked in that particular year. The questions are also highly repeatable and they have high repeat value, and the themes also have a high repeat value, as you can see from the previous year questions that we are going to discuss. So a set number of themes is there in this subject, and a set number of data and definitions are there. So it's easy to cover and it is good mark ratio. It can yield you good marks with very little effort, but provided that you put in the effort to remember the basics of the subject in an academic and in a more theoretical way, rather than just writing things which seem to be picked up from the newspapers or from the television reports, but also having a scholarly background on it and having a theoretical framework established on all of these topics. So we're going to begin first with what is exactly internal security. So internal security. The term internal is quite clear. Internal means internal to a country, that is to a state which has a defined boundary and citizens. So internal refers to a state, while security, the term security, can be defined as freedom from threats. So security refers to the freedom from threats and various kinds of threats. It relates directly to only extremely dangerous threats. So when we talk about internal security, we are not talking about non-dangerous or less dangerous threats. We are talking about those threats which are extremely dangerous. And how do you decide which threat is the most dangerous? That is, those threats which may hamper or destroy the core values of society, nation, and humanity in general. So, if a certain value like peace, or if a certain value like honesty, uprightness, justice, if these are at threat, and at extremely dangerous threat, then that is a breach of security or a potential security issue. So that's where the term security comes from. That is freedom from threats, and not just all the threats, but extremely dangerous threats. Now, these threats, they need to be mentioned as to what kind of threats might exist. So, if we have to subclassify the elements of security or internal or in general elements of national security or just security, then there are two elements of security for any nation. One is the external element or the external notion of threat, and the other is the internal notion of threat. Now, what constitutes the external notions of threats or the external elements? Number one is military threats. So, threats to a country from the military or the army or the navy or the air force of the other countries or the other states is an important element of the external security. Apart from that, what comes under this term is the role of deterrence as an element and defense as another element of external security. So, deterrence and defense. What does the term deterrence mean? Simple words, deterrence means prevention of war, while defense means to protect a country from war by the use of their internal power. So, basically limiting or ending the war refers to the term defense. So, these two are another element of external security. Apart from that, another element of external security is balance of power. This you must have read about in international relations, this term. Balance of power basically refers to what actions a country must take to ensure that they have a strong hold over other countries and are not at direct or indirect threat from them. So basically, countries which maintain a favorable balance of power with other countries, they are usually having a lesser matrix or lesser quantum of threats related to their securities. This is done by building up of military power, building up of economic might, and building up of strategic alliances. So, balance of power is nothing but countries pointing the guns at each other's heads and no one shooting them, because one country, when it gains an edge over the balance of power on another country, then that country points the gun at their chest. Then the other country points another gun at the other country's other organs or maybe the leg, and then another person comes on behalf of the second country to hold the gun on the head of the first country, and so on the cycle remains. So basically, balance of power is nothing but USA pressurizing India through China, India sometimes on certain issues aligning with China to pressurize US pressurizing Europe on certain ends, and Europe colluding with China to pressurize USA to counter that threat. So basically, all the countries are in constant need to balance their economic and military might using various organs. Then the fourth element of external security is building of alliances. So these alliances may be formal, written and declared. For example, the NATO alliance, which is a formal military alliance with between US and Western Europe. So this sort of an alliance is declared, is something which is formal. Apart from that, there can be alliances which are informal. These might not be declared in an overt way, but they are present, and they are present with various countries in an undeclared manner. there is an alliance, and why the alliance? The objective of this alliance is to ensure that the interests or the national interest of a country is upheld. So these all are the external notions or external elements of security. Now we come to the internal elements of security. So the internal elements or the internal notions of security, they comprise of a few elements. Number one, terrorism. We'll define this when we cover the class on terrorism. Then comes insurgency or armed insurgency. In case of India, it may be across various regions and between different groups. Then comes the role of the separatism. Another element of national security is separatism, that is seceding or secession from a country on the demand of certain groups in an armed way or in a violent way. So all these are the notions of internal security. For example, Naxalism is one more element. In case of secessionism is the case of Khalistanis, the JNK, all the separatist groups. These are part of the internal notions of internal notions of security. Now, what is the evolution of this topic, internal security? Was it always important? No. It was not earlier that important because sovereignty or the concept of nation state came into prominence post the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, after which countries started consolidating their territories and ensuring that they have strict boundaries, they have international relations with other countries, and they have clear citizenship. So before that was the case of multi-ethnic states that converted into the concept of nation state. That began from Europe, and it gave the concept of citizenship and imposed clear boundaries. Now, once clear boundaries of a state, of a territory are established, and if clear citizens are demarcated, then they have their own interests which are common. And other states who are maybe adjacent to these nation states or who might have conflicting interests with these nation states are now at loggerheads with them. So this creates a conflict. Now these conflicts played out in the backdrop of the Industrial Revolution and the birth of new nation states who were industrialized and who were growing powers like Germany, like Japan, etc. These went on a war path with the earlier established countries during the two world wars. And ultimately, US and USSR, or the Americans and the Russians, they combined together to defeat all the other powers, and then came the period of post-World War. In this post-World War period, the rest of the countries who were earlier colonized were decolonized finally after about a 200 period of colonization by the formerly developed states, because again they had lost a lot of resources and a lot of might because of being engaged in these two world wars. So this happened in the context of World War II, when US and USSR, they combined together to actually decimate all the other powers and ensure their supremacy. Now, post the World War II, as US and USSR had an inherent tension. This inherent tension was rooted in their ideology, which was at loggerheads, that is, capitalism versus communism. Capitalism focused on the advent or the growth or the dominance of private capital, private ownership, while communism focused on distributing all the resources equally within the community. These countries followed capitalism, USA and USSR followed communism respectively. This was at loggerheads. So, after a period of hot wars or overt wars, they did not want to fight a very overt war within or amongst them or between them. So, they went into a phase of Cold War. This Cold War was actually a war with peace, where peace and war coexisted, and US and USSR never directly attacked each other but started attacking each other indirectly by using other states as well as non-state actors. So, other countries or other states and other non-state actors were used to carry out conflicts between these two countries. This was not done in a very overt way. It was done in a covert way, and in a way where though the two large powers did not come at loggerheads with each other. Now, during this Cold War period, the rise of non-state actors and internal security threats that became prominent. Why? Because they were empowered by these large powers to fight wars on their behalf. For example, US empowered the Taliban and created the Taliban to fight USSR's dominance in Afghanistan. So this was done by the US, and this created various other groups which itself, for example, Al-Qaeda, which itself attacked US in 9/11, thereby creating internal security threats. So this sort of war with peace or the Cold War, it used these state and non-state actors to carry out various conflicts and various armed insurgencies. 1945 gave the birth of UN when the World War II ended. However, UN itself is not very adept to solve this crisis. Why? Because UN itself is just nothing but a creature of its own members. UN can only do what its members wants it to do. If the members themselves want to fight in whatever way and create security threats for each other, then the UN also could not do much to solve this threat. So these Cold War alliances, this led to the rise of civil wars and civil conflicts within most of the countries, especially the developing countries. This time, the larger powers, the superpowers, they decided to change their strategy. Earlier, the world wars were fought within the developed world. They were mostly fought around Europe, and that destroyed Europe's economy and destroyed the powers of all the colonizers in the 50 years within which the wars were fought. So, from 1914 to 1945, just a period of 31 years, most of the economies of Europe and Western Europe, which were well developed, they got destroyed. Why? Because the theater of war was Europe. Even in World War II, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, which was an American base. So even when America realized that even it was getting involved in this and its own territory was being used for warfare, then during the Cold War, they decided to change this theater of conflict to the developing countries. So wars were fought in Afghanistan, they were fought in Vietnam, they were fought in Serbia. Why? Because that ensured that the Western European countries and the larger superpowers, they are not directly affected by the scourge of war this time. The data says that today more than 90% of all armed conflicts are internal in nature. That's where the field of internal security actually got its prominence. Earlier, the security threats were not that much internal, but today, as the theater of warfare and the kind of warfare and the threats have changed, so has the notions of security. And there is a greater emphasis on the notions of or the elements of internal security in present day. So this was the complete story behind the rise of internal security as a subject. Now, what we have to look at is how India approaches the topic of internal security through its national security strategy, which is not yet formal, but that does not mean that it does not exist. It exists. However, it is not something which is formally written, but we have informal evidences, as there is the saying that actions speak louder than words. That applies to India's national security strategy, which is yet to be formulated formally, whereas countries like US, last year it released its updated national security strategy, where it said that a rules-based international order is a liberal illusion. So, and that is directly reflected in its approach. 2025, this strategy came out. 2026, US got directly involved in the Iran conflict. It got directly involved in conflicts across all these countries. It directly kidnapped the president of Venezuela in the name of injustice and in the name of the crimes that he was committing. So that a national security strategy is a clear reflection of what a country's intentions are in the domain of internal or national security. In case of India, there are certain, and for any other country, there are certain elements of national security which are common. So there are certain elements of national security. First is military security. That is the strength of the military in terms of its officers, its soldiers, basically all its human resource, and its technology, its weaponry. So this constitutes the element of military security. Then you can use this term 4E, that is economical. Then that is followed by energy, environment, and ethnic security. So all these are other notions of security. Economic security, for example, are foreign exchange reserves, which are under pressure these days. The value of the rupee is falling. So forex is an element of our national economic security. Or the NPAs, the rise of NPAs can be a threat to this element of economic security of the country. In terms of energy security or strategic petroleum reserves, they form an element of our internal energy security. In the case of environmental security, anything related to the destruction of our forest, our ecosystem, climate change threats, all these are elements of the environmental security. And in case of ethnic security, the civil conflicts, like the conflicts in Manipur, which is an ethnic conflict, that is a direct element which is threatening the ethnic security of the country, that is the harmony between various racial and ethnic groups. So these are the 4E elements of the internal security. Apart from that, there is resource security or disaster related security, which involves disaster management planning. Then there is another element, that is the use of chips, cyber, health, information, followed by political security and strategic security. Cyber security, we are going to cover in the following classes. Cyber security is nothing but the security of our cyber networks or information technology networks. Health security refers to events like COVID-19, which threatened the overall health infrastructure of the country and the health security of the country. Information security refers to our information transmission lines or our lines of communication, which have to be secure at all times so that no sensitive information about the country is ever leaked. Then political security refers to how well our polity is stabilized and how stable our polity is in terms of the democratic process, in terms of elections, the integrity of elections, etc. Then comes the strategic security that refers to how well poised we are in terms of the regional geopolitics and the local geopolitics. For example, supply chain vulnerabilities, the lack of critical minerals, they are all threats to our strategic security. So, this whole framework covers the ambit of the types or the elements of national security for India. Now, there are two things apart from this which will help frame your answers. One is regarding India's latest unsaid and non-formal but actionable doctrine regarding security, that is the Doval doctrine. NSA Ajit Doval is the one who has basically implemented this. It is his brainchild. It is nothing which is written in a document, but it is something that can be extracted from the actions of India over the last 12 years as well as the stands that we have taken. The elements of the Doval doctrine are: first, defensive offense. So defensive offense means we can attack to defend our borders. The examples are Balakot strikes of 2019 and the surgical strikes of 2016. Next part of the Doval doctrine is preventive self-defense. This is directly taken from the UN Charter, Article 51, which talks about preventive self-defense. Then comes the topic of cost imposition. This is another element of the Doval doctrine that talks about imposing a high cost of war on our adversaries by using geopolitical pressure on them. For example, pressurizing IMF to blacklist Pakistan or to put them in the grey list, or to ensure that various agencies like the Financial Action Task Force, etc., they are put in the grey list and the blacklist. So this is another element. Apart from that, integrating the various institutions of power. So integration of institutions of power is another element of the Doval doctrine. What are these institutions of power? Military, diplomatic, political, intelligence agencies. So all these instruments of power, they are supposed to be integrated and working in a coordinated manner. In terms of intelligence agencies, the external agencies like RNW and internal agencies like IB, local CID, etc., all these have to work in complementarity. Why? So that both human intelligence, that is human, and technological intelligence or technical intelligence, that is techint, they are well derived, well extracted, and then well used by all the involved stakeholders in national security. So this is something that is the Doval doctrine that is going to form an important part of your answers, whether it is asked or not, but this can be a good way forward. And if you show this kind of theoretical understanding of internal security, you will definitely score better than others who will write generic answers taken from basic newspapers or taken from basic media reports. Next, what is needed to be understood is the concept of comprehensive national power. This was a concept which arose in the 1980s by the work of various scholars, and there are 6 elements of this comprehensive national power. What is comprehensive national power? Basically, it is the ability of a country to protect its strategic interests. So this ability that it will use with respect to its resources especially, and that will help it achieve its strategic objectives, that is the comprehensive national power. So this is the power or the ability of a country to achieve its strategic objectives. It has 6 very clear elements. Number 1, military power. Number 2, political power. Number 3, geographical and natural resources based power. Number 4, economic power. Number 5, technological power. And number 6, governance and diplomatic power. So the use of governance and diplomacy, the use of technology, the building up of economic might, all these add up to the comprehensive national power of any country. So this again can be used as a very good way forward in any of your answers. This question was already asked in the ethics paper a few years back. So you can see how all these topics are related, and what the UPSC exam, the mains exam, is trying to do. It's trying to test whether you have an in-depth theoretical understanding of the topics that are given in the syllabus. So you just don't have to read the news related to these. You have to understand the theoretical frameworks behind all these topics, which will be rewarded by the examiners, because the examiners themselves are academicians. They are senior university professors. What they will expect is academic insight, not just the blurting out of facts and data. So that won't yield you marks. Theoretical understanding like this is going to yield you good marks. So we must understand now India's strategy. India's national security strategy is multi-pronged in nature. We have adopted initially, and even today we have a multi-pronged strategy to carry out our national security. At the international level, we adopted the non-alliance movement. So we basically became neutral in the Cold War. We did neither supported the US nor supported the USSR. So basically this neutrality was NAM, or the non-alliance movement, which we were a part of. So we used NAM as a policy to promote global peace. Today, NAM, although has not been formally replaced or even informally replaced, but we have modified a stance a little bit to ensure there is strategic autonomy, as well as there is a case-to-case selective diplomatic engagement with all parties. So in place of being non-aligned, we are today now having a multipolar or a multi-aligned approach, where we are aligning with whoever can help build an alliance and build up our national power and build up our the immunity from the threats of security. So we are now focusing on a multi-aligned approach at an international level. At the national level, we again have a multi-stakeholder approach, where we have tried to ensure first through the constitution that everyone residing within India, all the citizens are equal. Right to equality, Article 14. There is no discrimination, Article 15, Article 17, no untouchability. Then there are sections for welfare, like Article 16 giving reservation, Apart from that, we have given freedoms to the people, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, freedom of speech and expression. Why? So that there is lesser and lesser friction and lesser inequalities. We'll provide equal opportunities to everyone so that there is a lesser chance of conflict and there is a lesser chance of tension and friction within the Indian society and Indian citizenry. This will lead to a lack of or a reduction in violence. Apart from that, diplomatically, we have been at the international level. Diplomatically, we have been engaging with various stakeholders to ensure our threats are reduced. For example, we have had agreements with Myanmar, we have had agreements with Bangladesh to ensure that they do not harbor terrorists or insurgents against India. This is the prime source of friction between India and Pakistan, that Pakistan on its own soil supports the terrorist groups which target India. For issues at the national level like Naxalism, what we did, we earlier treated it as a security problem, but finally we have solved it using a socio-economic or developmental approach. We realized that it was a developmental problem, it was a problem of deficit of governance, and that is how we solved this problem of the Naxalism, and it is now almost restricted to only a few pockets. Earlier it used to be called the Red Corridor. Why red? Because red is the color of communism, which is commonly representing communist movements, and the Naxalism is influenced by Maoism, which is in itself a form of communism. So red and the corridor meant that these areas were connected, which had great influence and command of these Naxals or these violent Maoist groups. Today it has been restricted to only a few pockets, and we have cleared up Naxalism from major tracts and major centers of the earlier movement. So this is where the topic ends of internal security. What is the theoretical framework and the background behind this? Now this gives you an understanding of the topic. Now we come to our first topic of the day. First topic of our day is the linkage between development and spread of extremism. So the linkages between development and spread of extremism. Like we've done all across environment as well, we'll do the same thing here. We'll first analyze what are the previous year questions that have been asked in this topic. So linkages between extremism and development. The PYQs show a very clear pattern. Firstly, no issue, there are very few questions. In fact, I don't think there are more than one or two which ask about the complete picture. The PYQs are focusing on regions where there is the linkage between extremism and development. So the question is focused at a particular region, at a particular problem. So again, the issue with GS3 is the lack of marks. And why people don't get marks? Because a particular question is asked. The question is asking something very, very specific. For example, last year they asked an account of in the last 10 years, how many agreements or initiatives have been taken by the government in the Northeast with various insurgent groups to carry out the peace process. So if you don't know those exact initiatives or with the exact groups which were taken, then you would probably not score very good marks. Unless you knew about that specifically, no amount of theoretical background, any amount of history, or any amount of current affairs will help you. You had to know about the specific answer. So there are certain regions which have been focused upon. Firstly is the region where Naxalism takes place, that is the central eastern India. Next comes the topic of northeast insurgency across the whole of the northeast. And thirdly, the questions that are asked repeatedly are about the problem of Jammu and Kashmir. So whatever internal security threats or the linkages between extremism and development exist in J&K, these are always at focus and they're always constantly being asked by the examiners. What dimensions are supposed to be opened up here? The causes of this linkage, basically. How these linkages exist. For example, a question was asked on overground workers that were used by terrorist groups in Jammu and Kashmir. Then government's strategy or steps or policy to solve these problems, and the issues why which arise out of this linkage between extremism and development, and how to break this linkage. So this is the core demand of the question, the various types of demands that have been asked from this topic of linkages between extremism and development. That means that we have to focus on various particular types of development. For example, a few years back, the question was asked regarding the winning of hearts and minds in terrorism affected areas, which is an essential step in restoring the trust of the population. So we had to discuss now the measures adopted by the government in as part of the conflict resolution process in Jammu and Kashmir. Similarly, what are the determinants or causes of left-wing extremism in eastern part of India, and what strategy should government adopt to solve this problem? Then last year I mentioned the question regarding the peace agreements initiated by government in Northeast India. So now this year, and last year a question was Naxalism was also asked. So this year a question maybe on Jammu and Kashmir could be asked. Why? Because last year both Naxalism as well as the Northeast insurgency, the questions were asked regarding that, and these are the only three themes which have been asked. Apart from that, specific issues like mob violence have also been asked in under this topic, but they also constitute interlinkages with other topics of the syllabus. So again, basically anything related to scheduled areas, scheduled tribes, which is linked with issues of Naxalism, all these linkages have been addressed by the UPSC in its questions. The domain is fairly restricted, and what you need to know and remember is also quite concise. So that is not going to be a cause of worry for you, because the content then becomes quite limited. Now, we have to understand the basics of each term, linkages between extremism and development. So, the development as a term, we understand what is development. Development is nothing but qualitative improvement in the standard of life or conditions of the people. So, development as a term is a qualitative term which indicates the improvement in the quality of life and not just the quantitative improvement. That doesn't just mean the improvement in incomes or improvement in the per capita income or the improvement in GDP. It means a qualitative change in the lives of people. For example, them becoming healthier, them becoming more educated, them having a better standard of life. So all these are what constitutes development. Now, what is extremism? Extremism refers to holding of extreme views / ideology by individuals or groups. So, holding of extreme views or ideology, especially in terms of religion and in terms of political views. So, extreme religious or political views, the holding of that refers to extremism. Here, what extremism actually is activities which are against the values of the state. And mostly all the states have values such as peace, such as freedom, such as prosperity. All those are the key tenets, and welfare, all these are the key targets and tenets of a state. And extremism is actually against or not in accordance with the norms of these states and rejects democracy, is intolerant of others, and may also become at some point a big social problem. In terms of extremism, what we focus on is violent extremism here. Violent extremism is something which is the use of ideologically motivated violence to promote one's interests. So, the use of ideologically motivated violence to promote one's interests refers to violent extremism. It helps individuals or groups achieve their political goals. So basically, whatever is being done in the name of religion is essentially being done to achieve a certain political goal, and ultimately it is done to achieve the best possible economic goal for any individual or a group. Now, according to UNDP, what are the drivers of this extremism? If we understand the drivers of extremism, then we'll be able to make a flow chart in our answers and help provide a theoretical framework to our answers. So, what are these drivers? One is exclusion. So, the exclusion of people politically, ideologically, socially, that is one driver. That combined with the lack of diversity, violence, discrimination, and the perception. Violence, discrimination, perception problems, as well as the rejection of the existing political system. All these are drivers of violent extremism. This provides a fertile ground for radicalization of individuals and groups by hardcore ideologues. For example, the Islamic State, which influenced many individuals in Kerala and India to pick up arms and fight the war in Middle East. So it can influence individuals, groups, etc. Apart from that, socializing factors, also the drivers or the agents of socialization like family, like religion, like friends or peer group, they may also cause this radicalization, as we see in various cases across the country, that people become radical when they are in close contact with others who are themselves radical. This radicalization provides a fertile ground for active recruitment into extremist groups, or you are working as a passive recruit who might be at any point of time, when the real spark comes, then they might erupt into a flame. So given the right initiative or given the right stimulus, they might react in a violent way. This active recruitment finally, or in this passive recruitment, results in violent extremism ultimately. So this is how violent extremism occurs, and again the cycle continues where these people themselves then radicalize the people to become violent extremism. For India, the major drivers are also poverty, unemployment, and religion, and religious discrimination and social discrimination. So India, the context changes a little bit because of the caste system, because of the caste-based discrimination, because of the developmental politics, vote bank politics, political dynamics, etc. So again, these are just tailored for the Indian issues. Next, we'll talk about what is the cycle of this violent extremism and the cycle of development which will finally break this violent extremism. So once people get the fertile ground, they get the ideology, and there is a democratic deficit. So all these conditions which created the fertile ground, then an ideology which influences them, and then the governance or democratic deficit. This leads to radicalization and recruitment into violent extremist groups. Finally, this results in such conflicts. Different factors like, for example, exclusion of tribals. This provides a fertile ground. For example, the lack of democracy or autonomy to a certain group. The disruption of natural social relations within the tribals and ethnic issues, they all might act as various drivers. Now, there is something called the cycle of extremism, and there is something called the cycle of development. This is the virtuous cycle, and this is a vicious cycle. These two cycles are at loggerheads with each other, and to break the vicious cycle of extremism is needed the virtuous cycle of development. So what is this vicious cycle of extremism? Firstly, there is a governance deficit, then leads to a lack of livelihood or poor standard of life. That results in a fertile ground in the way of weak socioeconomic indicators. So the socioeconomic indicators become poor. That leads to disenchantment of an individual from the state. That leads to the increase in the radicalization. And ultimately, this violent extremism causes the governance deficit in itself. Why? Because whenever there is instability in society, lack of law and order, this will lead to a deficit in governance. Governance will not be effective, and again the vicious cycle will continue. Where is this cycle broken? That is broken by reducing this governance deficit. So that is where the cycle is broken. How this governance deficit can be reduced? By accelerating developmental activities. This can be done by increasing the income opportunities, reducing unemployment, increasing the infrastructure abilities of a place, making it more connected, and so on. These developmental activities, these lead to the improvement in the infrastructure. Poverty declines. As infrastructure improves and human capital and human resources improve, then poverty will decline. As the poverty will decline, there will be an improvement in socio-economic indicators. They will improve again, like they worsened in the previous case, and that will improve the governance deficit. That will be reduced, and it will lead to better developmental outcomes. So development will be ensured in a virtuous cycle in this way. So this is basically the linkage between extremism and development that any question will expect you to know. This is the basic theoretical background behind it. So basically, if you make this diagram, you get a good chance of scoring good marks. Tailor it to any developmental problem or any of the linkage between development and extremism problems. What is the government's policy here in this case? First, security measures, improving the law and order situation. Next is developmental measures, ensuring that development takes place in the areas. Thirdly is improving the rights and entitlements of locals. So, making sure that locals get their rights and entitlements. For example, the Forest Rights Act, it provides rights to the individuals and communities to forest land. And finally, managing the perception. So, perception management forms another government initiative. This was asked in terms of the PYQs, where it was asked, how is the strategy of winning hearts and minds working in improving the conditions in Jammu and Kashmir? So, managing the perception, ensuring development takes place, ensuring that there is good security measures in place, law and order in place, and rights are provided to the locals and tribals and vulnerable groups is very, very important. So for this, the government has a multi-pronged approach to convert this vicious cycle of extremism into a virtual cycle of development, which includes all the socio-economic approaches as well as the various law and order based approaches. Basically, the way forward in this case is not just implementing these measures, but how they are implemented. They have to be consultative. So any way forward, you will write that the process of breaking this cycle has to be consultative in nature. It has to be need based after assessment of the needs. So you have to assess the needs of the population. It has to be a need based action that is taking place. Apart from that, it should address specific grievances of the target communities and addressing specific and most painful issues of communities and having a mechanism for grievance redressal as well as disbursement of the relief. So the promises and the process should not be hollow, but having fixed operating procedures to ensure that there is justice that is done. In terms of the constitutional and legal safeguards that are available and that can be used in any answer on internal security, constitutional and legal safeguards. First, we can talk about the schedules like the 5th schedule, the 6th schedule, Article 244, 244A regarding the scheduled areas. Then apart from that, the 9th schedule, which has kept the land reforms law safe. Then various acts like the PISA Act, Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas Act 1996. Apart from this, the Forest Rights Act, the Prevention of Atrocities to SC/STs Act, the Forest Rights Act, the POA, SC/ST Act. All these are legal and constitutional safeguards along with the various land related reforms. So again, basically what we need is to address the critical needs of these conflict affected communities, ensure effective implementation of these strategies and ensure that there is prosperity for all and this cycle of extremism gets broken by development. So basically things like labor reforms, like in ensuring that the forest groups are given right to the non-timber forest produce under FRA. This is an initiative to ensure that the cycle of development, the virtuous cycle that gets initiated and the vicious cycle of extremism gets broken. So we'll see some of the material that we have. Basically, we can talk about what each and every issue is so that we have specific points and data regarding the specific issues that will be asked, because most likely what I taught you right now was the general framework that will be applicable in all the answers, but every problem already has well established and causes and well established steps that have been taken, and there are certain common way forwards that we will address using our theory. So regarding Naxalism, we should understand few things. Firstly, what is the root cause of Naxalism? What is Naxalism? Basically, it is India's most significant internal security challenge. It is rooted in ideology, governance failure, and developmental deprivation. It is anchored in Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and relies on Mao Zedong's axiom that political power grows out the barrel of a gun. So this is the core ideology behind the problem of left-wing extremism or Naxalism in the country. Next, we look at the root causes of Naxalism. Firstly is the developmental and economic drivers. There is a resource conflict regarding Jal, Jungle and Jameen, that is water, forest and land. So unchecked state corporate drives to set up large industries or mining complexes causes mass tribal land alienation. It has caused that in a lot of cases. This, along with that, a colonial background of exclusion through exclusionary acts like the Indian Forest Act, which excluded the tribals from the forest and de-linked them from their natural habitat, were major causes of this, the developmental and economic driver of the problem of Naxalism. Then the problem of resource curse. This is a geographical theory that says that any place which is resource rich in the world is bound to be poor and is usually facing with a lot of socio-economic problems. Why? Because of over-exploitation of natural resources from such resource-rich areas like the mineral-dense zones of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and which has great environmental costs at the expense of the areas which are being mined. So these places act like resource farms to the greater powers. Then there is displacement asymmetry. Tribals constitute nearly all 40% of internally displaced population in the country, and among them 80% are women. So there is a high asymmetry in terms of how many people are internally displaced, while they are only 8% or 7 to 8% of our total national population. Then the problem of livelihood loss that needs to become, that is an important driver of this developmental and economic deficit. Now comes the problem of governance deficit, that is the failure of constitutional safeguards like Article 244, the 5th schedule, along with the acts like the Peace Act. They are not properly implemented. The Forest Rights Act has a great issue where there is very hardly people are easily issued the land rights, and there is great pendency in their applications. Next, non-implementation of laws like the Forest Rights Act, Peace Act, administrative vacuum, that the visibility of the welfare institutions and the administrative organs is not high in the areas such as the areas of Maoist influence. Then there is something called the tri-junction theory. What happens is, at the junction of three states or three different politico-administrative entities, there is a deficit where the borders are in terms of administrative and state capacity. Why? Because the borders themselves are not sometimes clearly demarcated or demarcable because of the geographical constraints as well as the intermixing of various cultural and regional influences. So because of such not very hard boundaries and having very porous boundaries, because India is essentially a union of states, that leads to a deficit in development in these tri-junction areas. For example, the Dandakaranya tri-junction in Chhattisgarh, that is an important red or the Maoist area. Why? Because none of the agencies or the administrative organs of all these three various regions or the states, they are ready to take up full responsibility for all the areas, and the geographical complexities, the presence of hills, mountains and rivers makes administration not a very clear task, because as administration is confined within boundaries, that becomes a trouble or a challenge for them to ensure or to carry out operations without the consent of the other state. So it becomes a problem because of the tri-junction borders. Then the social and political drivers such as social exclusion, the gender dimension, the human rights violations by the security forces as well as the state, all these act as great drivers for causing the influx of or the rise of Naxalism. Now, what is going to be a fodder for your answers, although last year it was directly asked, so lesser chance of it being asked this year. However, you might use it as a case study or as an example or as a way forward for any other such similar problem is the Samadhan doctrine, which is the 8-pillar framework used by Government of India to solve the problem of Naxalism and left-wing extremism, which essentially has been identified as a socio-economic developmental problem. What is S? S is smart leadership. A is aggressive strategy, M is motivation and training, A is actionable intelligence, that is real-time data collection, D is using of dashboard-based key performance indicators, where there will be data-driven monitoring of all Naxal, anti-Naxal operations. Then H is harnessing technology, that is deploying drones, thermal sensors, and remote sensing and GPS tracking. Apart from that, A is action plan per theater, that is customizing district-specific operational maps, because every district or every region has a specific geography which defines its security threat. Naxals or the left-wing extremisms, they find places within the dense forest, the river valleys, or wherever there is natural harbors to protect them, and that is highly complex and diverse, so not a single strategy can be applicable to all the districts. Apart from that, N is no access to financing, that is disruption their extortion rings, the money laundering, and the logistic channels. So all these are going to be important pillars for any answer, and this is the strategy that the government employs to solve the problem of Naxalism. Then we need to know certain security-based interventions that the government has initiated or it has put in place to solve the problem of Naxalism. One is the Cobra Battalion of the CRPF. Basically, these are specialized CRPF units for jungle warfare against Maoists. Then the Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana and Black Panthers of Chhattisgarh. These are elite state formations for anti-left-wing extremism operations. Then the Bastaria Battalion of CRPF, it recruited local tribal youth from Bastar, leveraging their native linguistic skills and cultural knowledge. And then a fusion of intelligence, that is real time of sharing of intelligence, the human intelligence as well as the technical intelligence through the multi-agency center and the joint task forces between the center and the state. So the MAC is an agency which coordinates all the intelligence information across the agencies of the country. So that is used to ensure that intelligence is very well used and is available in real time. Then the development based interventions, which are the most important, is the 3C connectivity model: road networks, digital connectivity, and financial connectivity. So road based connectivity, digital connectivity through mobile towers, the influx of 4G, and financial connectivity to rural post offices and banking. This is the 3C strategy to ensure that development is easily reached in these areas. Apart from that, the aspirational blocks program along with the aspirational district program, they have acted as a data-driven initiative to ensure that the most backward of blocks, the most backward 500 blocks of the country and the most backward 100 districts are put on a path of development. Then is the PM Janjatiya Unnat Gram Yojana, which is a new scheme to saturate all the social welfare schemes that are operating for the tribals of the country. So that has been used especially for the focusing on the particularly vulnerable tribal groups which are not given any state protection, which are not part of any of the scheduled tribe lists because they were earlier criminal and denotified tribes. So they were never part of the scheduled tribes. Then Eklavya model residential schools for tribals for giving residential based schooling in the tribal societies and tribal areas. Then the Roshni scheme, that is placement linked transformation for rural youth in left wing extremism affected areas. So all these are great initiatives to quote in your answers regarding Naxalism. Now the current state of Naxalism, the left wing affected districts have reduced from 182 to 18 in 2025. Most affected ones are only 3. Annual fatalities have dropped to less than 150 now. Last year I think they were even lesser, they were 30 or something. And violent incidents have fallen from 1936 to 374. There is the geographical concentration, only over 90% of remaining violence is only in Chhattisgarh in certain areas, and most of it has been eliminated. The target was to eliminate left-wing extremism, Naxalism by 31st March 2026, which the government claims has been achieved as most of the tribal insurgent groups or the Maoist groups have laid down their arms and engaged in various agreements with the government. So this map can be made from red corridors to red pockets, that this is now the status of 2013, and now this is the current status, where only Chhattisgarh has the most affected areas along with certain parts of Jharkhand and Telangana. So mostly the left-wing extremism has been eliminated. However, few pockets might remain. So if the status of elimination of left-wing extremism is asked, then you'll have to quote the latest data from Ministry of Home Affairs, which might be updated in the next couple of months. So we'll have to wait a little bit. But whatever the final status is on the day of your mains exam, that is what you should be writing. The more your data is updated, the better informed your answers will appear and you will score better. So emerging challenges, the whatever future challenges remain is urban Naxals and frontal networks. Basically, Naxalism's ideology has shifted to cities, within intelligentsia, within academia, within various institutions of the country, so that the ideology remains alive even if the movement on ground is quite decimated. So civil society groups, legal fronts, student groups, they are associated with urban Naxalism. Then improvised explosive devices called IEDs, they are increasingly being used to fool the security forces and causing casualties by explosions. Then extortion systems with the collusion of terrorists and criminals. So the Naxalisms are establishing partnerships with organized crime groups. For example, the syndicates of illegal mining, they are in collusion with Naxals now. So that is creating another future challenge. And then digital radicalization. Marxist ideologies are now packaged into encrypted messaging apps and social platforms to attract younger people into the philosophy, along with transnational corridors. For example, across the country, the Maoist groups are in contact with the insurgent groups of Northeast India. So those are the emerging and future challenges. Next, the problem of Northeast insurgency. Northeast is again, there is a code for Northeast, that the diversity of Northeast India is diverse itself. That is the biggest challenge in governing the area. That is the biggest cause of the governance deficit in the Northeast, along with its heavily forested land, complex terrain, complex physiography, complex tribal society, where all the tribals, because of social and geographical isolation, they have not been able to evolve a common language. Because of that, one tribe does not understand the ways of life and does not have close social ties with other tribes. That itself becomes a cause of and a place of friction for both of them, and it becomes a crack in the social fabric of the Northeast. And that crack is exploited by the elements who want to disturb the peace of the area for their own personal, political, and economic benefits. That is the whole background of Northeast. That is the whole reason behind the issue of Northeast. So it is a complex mosaic, this keyword you can use, of ethnic identities, historical grievances, developmental deficits, and external influences, creating a distinct security landscape. What are the basic foundational drivers? Again, historical alienation, starting from the British times, the colonial times, where they were excluded and not cared for by the British, to the post-independence identity disconnect, especially among the Tibeto-Burman ethnic groups, because the frontier areas of the country, especially the northeast frontier, were left neglected, so that we are never in conflict with our neighbors. So the policy was to keep the border areas, to keep the frontier areas less developed, so that no one from outside can easily invade us, and there is lesser tension between the neighbors of India and the government of the country. So this is an issue. Then demographic fault lines, unchecked illegal cross-border immigration, especially from countries like Myanmar, from Bangladesh, that causes tensions. Then economic underdevelopment, the infrastructure is highly underdeveloped. It is the terrain has not yet been fully captured for development. All those issues, youth unemployment, youth education issues, then geographical terrain and external support, that is the rugged terrain along the international borders. It creates impediments for development and for connectivity and makes the population isolated and easily influenced by the links with the golden triangle, that is the countries of Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, who produce opium and drugs which are through the northeast transported across the country and distributed amongst the youth. So overall we have to see the linkages and the various peace accords that have taken place. That was already asked last year. So we need to have a list of all these peace accords. For example, the Bodo Peace Accord in Assam that occurred in 2020, Adivasi Peace Accord, Karbi Anglong Agreement, these are the latest ones. Then with Manipur groups, there has been no final settlement. Apart from that, Nagaland, there's been a ceasefire since 1997, final resolution is still not there. They are demanding, the certain groups like NSCN-M and NSCN-K, they are demanding Greater Nagalim, that is a territory where all the Nagas have a dominant history and a dominant population. Then in Tripura, NLFT has surrendered and Brue-Riang crisis is resolved. There is a Brue-Riang agreement in 2020 which settled 37,000 displaced people. Then in Mizoram, the insurgency has been fully resolved. The Mizo Peace Accord of 1986 with the government, it is a great template for conflict resolution as to how the insurgents were brought into the mainstream. And in Meghalaya, certain organizations have been banned and insurgency is largely controlled. So all these groups, they might be having certain sporadic demands. For example, there is the inner line permit demand in Meghalaya. From time to time, there are certain conflicts between Meghalaya and Assam also at certain points of time. But however, largely the security situation in Northeast, except Manipur, is fairly in control in an overt way. Again, like we have repeatedly seen, that the government has a multi-pronged strategy while dealing with any of the threats for internal security. So in the case of Northeast, the multi-pronged strategy is firstly legal using AFSPA, that is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which empowers Army to undertake actions in military actions in disturbed areas which are declared by the government. And the Jeevan Reddy and Santosh Hegde committees have recommended its repeal. But SC has mandated minimum force and accountability so that there is certain deterrence in the area. So the point is to prevent any conflict, and that is why AFSPA has been imposed in a few states. Apart from that, suspension of operations agreements along with the memorandum of settlements with the tribal and with the various insurgent groups, that acts as a legal backing to the stopping of violence. Then surrender cum rehabilitation, 4 lakh rupees is the immediate grant that is given along with the 6,000 rupee per month stipend along with vocational training to those insurgents who surrender in the area. So financial incentivization for surrendering. Then the Act East policy that enhances connectivity, trade and relations with the eastern neighbors of a country, part of which is the Asian Highway 1, which crosses whole of the northeast into Myanmar and connects India, and in the future it will connect India and Thailand through Myanmar as a trilateral highway. The Kaladan multimodal project, which will connect Kaladan to Sitwe in Myanmar, bypassing Bangladesh, is also an important element of this policy. Then the progress of Northeast India is that the budget has increased by 153. There is a specific ministry for development of Northeast. Programs like PM Divine are there established for the development specific of Northeast. Violence is down by 70% and casualties are down by more than 85% now from the past. So this is a map which shows all the various recent conflicts and the ceasefires that have been negotiated within the Northeast states. So this can be used if ever asked in the examination. However, this year there is a less likelihood to be asked. Now again, for Jammu and Kashmir, bit of a brief background is needed because here the background is common, and the common background here is again nothing but the partitional history and the demographic challenge along with the issue of the instrument of accession of Kashmir, which was signed by the Raja of Kashmir, the King of Kashmir, with the Indian government, which was disputed by Pakistan because they claimed it to be their territory, and in 1947 was a war for Kashmir between India and Pakistan, after which certain parts of Kashmir were occupied by the Pakistani forces called the Pakistani occupied Kashmir, and rest of the Kashmir is in control of India. Legally, it is India's territory based on the partition agreement that occurred and the Indian Independence Act. So, apart from that, there were certain developments in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. There was largely stability and peace, except a few wars here and there. Internally, there was not much of an issue. But as we know that in 1980s, there was the rise of Taliban in Afghanistan, and that was promoted by US to fight USSR within Afghanistan. Finally, the Cold War ended in the mid-80s, and these trained insurgents and having a lot of arms and weapons and money now turned towards India. So in India, the external forces decided to promote conflicts like the Khalistani conflict. In Punjab, there was the rise of armed insurgency, and in Jammu and Kashmir, there was the rise of armed religious extremist insurgency. So then that meant that the 1987 to 89 was the first flashpoint where there were allegations of rigged elections which generated unrest. Kashmir was initially ruled by a Hindu king and it had a Muslim majority population. Similarly, Kashmir had communities of Kashmiri Pandits who were in minority but well off, and they lived along with the majority Muslim population who was not as well off comparatively. So 1987, there were rigged allegations of rigged elections. Then there were bomb blasts in Srinagar, and they marked the beginning of insurgency. And this coincided with the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits who were asked to leave or they would be massacred. Then a complete couple of decades of instability followed. There were wars in Kargil, there were internal insurgencies, lots of areas had armed rebel groups or armed terrorists who were operating there. And slowly and steadily, after the Kargil war especially, India had cracked down on most of these groups and there was largely peace by 2010. However, after the new government came in, there was certain unrest using social media and there were certain influences from outside, there was certain increased activity, and then the increased terrorist activity culminated in the Uri attack. This Uri attack was responded to by surgical strikes. That is, the strikes using a methodology where surgical precision is used, that the opponent or the adversary does not get to know when the strike would take place, and a team from India, from the Indian military, it went into the other country, Pakistan, and Pakistan occupied Kashmir and carried out anti-terror operations there and came back with surgical precision without any casualty. So those surgical strikes were conducted and they were an announcement of India's new security stance. Then again in 2019, the Pulwama attack was responded to by airstrikes using the Indian Air Force. In 2019, also the abrogation of Article 370, which gave special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, was done, and that led to its complete political unification with the country in a formal way. So constitutionally, Kashmir became like any other state or territory of the country. There were no special laws there, no special exemptions there, and that was a landmark moment. It was finally reorganized into two UTs. Then in 2024-5 assembly elections, they restored democratic representation in Jammu and Kashmir. However, 2025, the Pahalgam attack took place, which was responded to by Operation Sindoor, where India undertook again precision strikes on firstly the non-military targets which housed terror infrastructure and terrorist camps, This was followed by retaliation from Pakistan on India's military and civil areas, and then India responded with finally attacks on Pakistan's air bases to neutralize them. And basically, that is the whole summary of Operation Sindoor that happened in 2025. So, this is the current status of the problem. 2025 and 6 were marked by conflict in Kashmir and instability in Kashmir. What can be asked is the new trends or the upcoming trends that you should be aware about in terms of the law and order and the insurgency problem or the terrorist problem in Kashmir. So, in J&K, the new trends that are occurring is firstly, there is a geographic shift of the terrorism to Jammu. So, the epicenter of violent military activity was earlier in the Kashmir Valley along the Pir, and which has now shifted to across the Pir Panjal range to Jammu and in districts like Rajouri and Poonch. So, Pir Panjal is a heavily forested and having a very rugged terrain, and it is a long mountain range with high altitude. So, this provides a great safe haven to these terrorist groups who have now housed themselves in this Pir Panjal range and are able to easily move across it into various areas of the state. Next is the dominance of foreign actors. There was a higher proportion of local recruitment earlier. This was asked by UPSC regarding the overground workers, that is, workers who work overtly over the ground, that is, who do not carry out any violent extremist or terrorist attacks themselves, but are normal people who assist the terrorists in giving them information like human intelligence, technical intelligence, logistical support, moral support, economic support, etc. So, these overground workers, they are normal people, they carry out normal activities on a day-to-day basis, but they support the terrorists in their through various means. But now it has been replaced by active terrorism from highly trained foreign actors. Next, high-tech weaponry which was used in the Pahalgam attack. They wear sophisticated military gear, have very advanced weapons, night vision equipment, satellite phones, heavily encrypted communications which are not easily deciphered and interfered by the intelligence agencies. Then there is a subterranean jungle hideout problem in the Pir Panjal to escape intense civilian area surveillance, where they earlier used to live amongst the civilians moving from place to place. Now they operate in the jungle of Pir Panjal in complex underground bunkers. They have shifted to guerrilla tactics, that is, traditional stone pelting and mass agitations have now been reduced, and now they are using guerrilla tactics, that is, military warfare in a very unconventional way, where they make hit and run cases. They hit a target and then run away from them and ambush the security convoys or the security forces or civilians, and then they run away from them. These are called guerrilla tactics. Then there is a soft target vulnerability. Recent targets have been not the military installations but normal terrorists or pilgrims. For example, in the Riyasi attack of 2024, the pilgrims were attacked who were going to Jammu and Kashmir. Similarly, in 2025, in the Pahalgam attack, they were general tourists who were touring the Baisaran Valley, and they were the ones who were targeted, not the security forces. Then there is an increased focus on improvised explosive devices to execute those high impact attacks, as well as weaponizing the cyber apps. So they are using highly sophisticated IT equipment as well as using various encrypted apps and digital tools to mask their logistics, and narcotics are fueling the terror. So now the ground level networks are sustained through selling of drugs and using that money to ensure that there is local funding. And then there is the intent to polarize the local community, especially the Hindus and the Muslims, against each other. So the example again that I gave, targeting of pilgrims, cross-border retaliations, high altitude bases, There are 43 temporary operating bases, altitudes between 3,000 to 9,000 feet to flush out the insurgents now, and there is QR coded local tracking now. Authorities have created an Aadhaar linked QR coded registration database for over 50,000 local guides and pony handlers to filter out the hidden operators who have crossed the border to come here. What is the way forward in case of Jammu and Kashmir? We have to reinvigorate human intelligence, we have to re-establish the local information networks that were earlier there. Earlier, the armed forces and the intelligence forces, they used to gather a lot of intelligence from the locals. But today, that sort of camaraderie and that sort of relationship does not exist much. Then there should be tech-driven border barriers. There should be the CIBMS, that is the comprehensive border management system, which uses a lot of sensors and which uses remote sensing, seismic sensors. They should be used to detect infiltration. Whole of government financial freeze should be there. The properties of those people who are involved in the terror attacks or involved with terrorist groups, they should be seized and their funding should be frozen. And local empowerment and democratic governance. Firstly, if there is a reduction in the trust deficit or the governance deficit, as we saw in the cycle of development, if that is initiated, then definitely the problem of terrorism as well as this extremism ideologies will die down. If a strategic assessment of Operation Sindoor is asked about, then these following points can be used regarding military: how many camps were destroyed, 20% of Pakistan's air force infrastructure was targeted, air defense, how many drones were attacked, which missiles were used, diplomatically, what we did, we sent a delegation from the parliament across to the various countries. Kashmir was decoupled from the terror narrative. Then non-military measures like the Indus Water Treaty was suspended, put into abeyance. The Atari-Wagah border was closed. The SARC visa exemption scheme was cancelled. Then Colonel Sophia Qureshi and Wing Commander Vyomika Singh led the press conference to give a gender message, the gender domination message, that India is not just a country like Pakistan or other countries. We truly believe in gender empowerment. And then the new normal was swift retaliation as the new default. We can quote the Dovell Doctrine here regarding defensive offense and zero tolerance for nuclear blackmail. So this is a quote by the External Affairs Minister that India will not tolerate nuclear blackmail. That can be used as part of your answers for any such question. So these are the dimensions that had to be covered here. Apart from that comes the Manipur issue. That is again something which has not been asked yet but is a highly likely question for this year. Apart from the Kashmir question, again, why? Because Manipur itself is the biggest hotbed of a conflict in the last 2 years. So we'll focus on that now. Firstly, brief background of the issue. From pre-independence to the present day, the narrative has to be tracked regarding how the Manipur crisis has proceeded. So pre-independence and accession was the merger of the princely state of Manipur into the Indian Union. Then this was followed by the rise of insurgency in the valley, because Manipur itself is a mosaic of communities: the Meiteis, the Kukis and the Nagas. The Meiteis are primarily Hindus, the Nagas are mostly Christians, and the Kukis are from Myanmar and Buddhists. So what happens is that all these communities, they live in different areas. The geography of Manipur is such that it is 90% hills and 10% valley. There are hills surrounding the valley. There is a lake at the center called the Loktak Lake, and hills constitute most of the areas. However, the most of the development has taken place in the valleys. The valleys are inhabited by the community or the tribe called Meiteis. So that is the basic genesis of the conflict, that the Meiteis are more developed than the other communities and had stronger political power. Then the rise of insurgency was there in this area. Then the hill-valley divide deepened across years. There was tension between Nagas and Kukis regarding control in the hill districts. Then there was a suspension of operations agreement in 2008. with the central government, with the Kuki-Zo insurgent groups. Then slowly across the next few years, demographic and border tensions with Myanmar led to certain changes in the demography of the area. They were outsiders, infiltrators who infiltrated into the local Manipuri society. So that led to tensions. There was a military coup in Myanmar, was the basic cause of this. And Chin refugees entered into Manipur's hill districts. This heightened Meiteis' fears of unnatural demographic shifts. Then in 2023, Manipur High Court ordered suggested the scheduled tribe status for the Meiteis, who are Hindus. So essentially, tribals are people who worship nature and Meiteis are Hindus. But the Manipur High Court, it suggested that they should be given scheduled tribe status. Along with that, AFSPA was revoked from many of the districts of Manipur in 2023. That led to a security vulnerability, and this gave them a spark. The groups who wanted to create unrest, they got the spark from here, and finally it led to the civil war or the conflict in Manipur that occurred in 2023 and 2024. Ultimately, the free movement regime which India had with Myanmar, wherein both the citizens of the country could move within 16 kilometers of each other's borders freely without visa, that was ultimately taken back, rolled back, and the borders became better sealed. So this is the current status right now. There was also the issue of opium cultivation, which was being cracked down by the government because opium cultivation was being diverted into the drug and the organized crime network of the country. The drug traffickers were seizing most of this poppy and opium cultivation. This much worth of drugs has been seized in Manipur from 2017 to 2023. A lot of deforestation took place and 3,000 hectares of land has been encroached for the cultivation of poppy. So this became one of the biggest flashpoints of the issue, that the lobby of opium cultivators and the organized crime lobbies, they were in fear that because of the crackdown by the government, and they wanted to create unrest so that the network continues. Over 7,000 plus illegal infiltrators came to India in the last 20 years for poppy cultivation. So this is the issue. It is in adjacent with the golden triangle, that is Myanmar, Laos and Vietnam. So what is the current status? The new chief minister has been installed. President's rule was earlier imposed, but a new chief minister has been installed now. Three-way conflict has escalated. The crisis has widened beyond the Meitei Kuki friction to a Kuki Naga problem as well. Internal borders have now been solidified. There have been buffer zones that have been made because the hill people and the valley people are not going into each other's areas. These are internal boundaries that have been created. These are invisible and have become structurally hardened internal borders because of the conflict. Then local flare-ups happen from time to time. Airport access has been tentatively given to the communities of the hills and because the airport is in the valley. So that has been given. And demographic inquiries have been launched. The central government has initiated a high-level committee to ensure that the demographic change due to infiltrators is assessed properly so that the problem is resolved. Now, what are the new trends? Again, drones are being used. There is asymmetric warfare. There is high industrialization of weapons. Weapons are being illegally imported from China and from Myanmar to be used here. Then, and also from Bangladesh. Then there is rigid demographic bordering. Basically, again, those groups have been restricted in their own zones. The hill groups in their hill zones and the valley groups in their valley zones. Then there is the involvement of third parties, that is the Nagas. There is cross-border spillover, that is Myanmar and India. The groups are exchanging funds as well as weapons as well as other technologies. Then there is institutional radicalization. Civil society groups have militarized into heavily armed village defense volunteers, and they are now radical fractions operating in a violent way. highways and economic corridors are blocked frequently, and there is high-tech target tracking. So technology is being used in this conflict by the various insurgent groups, and there is great relocation and displacement. Over 60,000 citizens live in permanent limbo inside relief camps, and state trust has collapsed. Governance deficit is at a all-time high. We can see the examples where there were rockets and various tactile weapons used, hostage crisis where gunmen abducted civilians in broad daylight, and mob assaulted central forces from time to time. UPSC also asked a case study on this a couple of years back. So what is the way forward here? Firstly, use of technology and enforcing a unified anti-drone and missile grid so that these high technology weapons are firstly neutralized. Then recover the looted and illegal arms, seal and monitor the international border, establish neutral central administration, that is, place volatile sectors under an empowered, unbiased, unified command structure to bridge the trust deficit, and initiate track 2 civil diplomacy, that is, we have to create an autonomous peace commission comprising trusted non-political community elders. So track 2 means basically one at the higher political level and one at the people to people level. So at a people to people level, the elders of the community who are not politically powerful or influential, they have to be used and utilized in a way so that social cohesion is improved in Manipur. That is the only way to ensure that the conflict is reduced, because here the problem is mostly of tension between the communities and rather than an unrest against the Indian state. So the basic problem is the tension between the communities. Here, developmental deficit can only solve the problem to a certain extent. The basic solution is improving the cohesion within the society and amongst the society members. Development is the best antidote to extremism. There are few common way forwards. We've mentioned so many that can be used for your answers. Next, the role of external state and non-state actors. So again, we'll have to first understand what are these external state and non-state actors, what kind of actions are involved in by these actors, what do they do first. Then we look at what are the questions that are asked. So topic 2, role of external state actors and non-state actors in the creating challenges to internal security. In creating challenges to internal security. So we'll just briefly understand what are these external state actors and what are these non-state actors. So external state actors are defined as those organizations or institutions which are external to the home state. They are external to the home state and established and monitored by the foreign states. So these are the external state actors. They threaten or influence the internal security of the home state. So they threaten the internal security of the home state. Non-state actors are basically those groups or those organizations which, in the name of various causes, they carry out certain threats and influence the security of a nation. So these exist within the country and they have sufficient political, social, and economic power that they threaten the internal security of a country. So these have a certain influence on the security of a nation. These have now transcended the boundaries because of globalization. They now operate across countries. Examples of the external state actors here are China, Pakistan, countries like Myanmar, etc. Whereas the non-state actors includes the terrorist organizations, the organized criminals, the drug traffickers, the various extremist groups, the insurgents, human trafficking cartels, fake currency cartels, cyber attackers, so human traffickers, fake currency networks, cyber attackers, all these groups are part of the non-state actors. Even civil society organizations, Maoists, Naxalites, and insurgents are all the members of this group. So these are the two kinds of actors who operate within the domain of giving challenges to internal security. For example, how they threaten it can be asked. How China threatens India's internal security, or how Pakistan threatens internal security, or groups, Naxal groups, or insurgents from Jammu and Kashmir, how they influence India's security. For example, China's biggest threat factor is the border disputes, the problem along the LAC that happened a few years ago, along the Pangong Lake and near the Galwan Valley. Then in the problem of economic threats to the nation by dumping of goods, by dumping made in China goods, then the string of pearls of China, then the various strategies like the One Belt, One Road initiative. All these are the threats from China, along with its support to the insurgents of Northeast. So China supports the insurgents of Northeast, and that has been reported by NIA. So in its NIA in its report has mentioned that the Chinese are a major source of arms and ammunition to insurgents, especially NSCN-IM and NDFB, groups like that. So through a transnational network, these insurgents pay money to the branches and receive shipments through Bangladesh and Myanmar. So they operate various networks and ensure that arms and ammunition and funding is provided to the insurgents in India. So that is how these networks operate. Similarly with Pakistan, and whatever is the solution to the problem is always two-pronged. One is diplomatic, one is military. So one, we'll use the force, military force, by cracking down on these groups, and then we'll put diplomatic pressure. Similarly, for Pakistan, we have a LOC ceasefire agreement in 2021, which was again flouted during Operation Sindoor. Apart from that, the state-sponsored terrorism from Pakistan is a major scourge to the country. And again, the solution lies in diplomacy as well as military action. Similarly, for the non-state actors, the problems are sectional and they are not common. However, solutions remain similar in nature as previously discussed. Now, let's see what are the previous year questions that are asked from this topic. Mostly, this topic has seen questions in terms of directly either asking the multi-dimensional effects of whatever internal security threats are caused by the internal and this external state and non-state actors. There is a common phrase that is consistently asked by UPSC, that terrorism is a global scourge. So terrorism being a global scourge, how has it manifested in India? Explain it, contemporary examples, and what are the countermeasures. So how terrorism as a global scourge has manifested in India? What are the causes basically behind it? What are the impacts or the effects? So we are again looking in a cause-effect framework, and what is the way forward or government steps? What has government done to counter this? So this is the kind of question that was asked a couple of years back. Apart from that, questions like multi-dimensional challenges posed by external state and non-state actors to internal security of India and measures taken, how narco-terrorism has emerged as a serious threat to the country, the banning of various overground worker groups and the role played by them in insurgency affected areas, then the role of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as a subset of One Belt, One Road initiative, the brief description of CPAC and why India has distanced itself from them. Then how do you suggest to tackle the scourge of terrorism in the country? Then the diverse nature of India as a multi-religious and multi-ethnic society is not immune to the impact of radicalism seen in the neighborhood, so discuss strategies. So questions like these are asked, which are not very, very technical, and they can be answered using your frameworks that we have learned till now. So they don't need much of specific information or specific theories, they just need a basic comprehensive picture of what exactly are these threats. So, for example, for China, again, we look at these headers. We look at how Pakistan state-sponsored terrorism takes place. It represents the most direct and sustained external state threat. This can be asked this year. Their policy is bleeding India with 1,000 cuts. This is the Zia-ul Haq doctrine. So this was formulated by the former military ruler of Pakistan, Zia-ul Haq. Then the ISI blueprint, it runs covert training infrastructure, distributes funds and infiltrates the various cadres of the country across the LOC. Then terror proxies like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat-ul-Dawa and Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen and TRF, the Resistance Front. All these are terror groups which are operating and which are supported by Pakistan. Narco-terrorism axis, that is due to the presence of the proximity of India with the Golden Triangle and the Golden Crescent, that is Afghanistan, Iran and Pakistan. These two, along with Myanmar, Vietnam and Laos, Cambodia, this forms the Golden Triangle, this is the Golden Crescent. Both are drug producing areas where opium or poppy is cultivated and it is illegally infiltrated across the world and the country. So that has a direct linkage with the terrorist groups. Whatever drugs are being transported, the terrorists help it to be infiltrated across the borders, and in return for that, they get their own share of money, and that helps fund and finance their terror operations. So there is a complementarity here. Then economic sabotage by fake Indian currency notes. Then the revival of Khalistan. All these are the latest threats from Pakistan which are occurring at this point of time. Similarly, with China, the status of the issue is grey zone coercion and strategic competition. Grey zone coercion means instrumental micro-transgressions and infrastructure build-up, that is salami slicing. Salami slicing is nothing but claiming a territory by slicing out pieces of it like a salami. So through the salami slicing technique, China is trying to invade into areas which are either in Indian territory or trying to infiltrate near the Indian territory by trying to slowly carry out development or settle its residents in those areas. So that is the salami slicing strategy. And this is called grey zone warfare, where war is not being fought directly. Then again, there is a two-front collision between Pakistan and China. Cyber espionage by China, various cyber attacks like the Mumbai power grid failure, that were the action of Chinese cyber criminals or the groups who carry out cyber attacks. Then internal fault line of Northeast are being exploited by China. Then there is something called Mapfare, that is unilaterally changing the names of places within India by claiming the territory as their own, which China does in Arunachal Pradesh. 27 new names for Arunachal Pradesh cities and districts were announced by China in 2025. Then the string of pearls theory, that is surrounding India across the Indian Ocean with various military and economic infrastructure so as to create pressure on India in the future and ensure there is a positive balance of power by China across the Indian Ocean region. This is countered by India's necklace of diamonds, which it is making across the same area to ensure that India also has certain influence in the region. So this map can be made. This shows the Indian necklace of diamonds, the Dukum port, the Chabahar port, the Minicoy Island here in Lakshadweep, Sitwe port, all these are Indian influence ports, and these are the ports of Chinese influence, like a necklace or a string of pearls. So a difference between the Chinese string of pearls and the Indian necklace of diamonds need to be understood, and it has to be used in your answers. Necklace of diamonds also involves a land-based component wherein the vibrant village program is an important component, which are the first villages of India near the border areas, which will be developed under this, connected by road, connected by tunnels, so that they become bastions and secure places. whereas critical strategic base access across the ports is also planned, like the Agalega Islands in Mauritius, where India recently built an airstrip, Sitwe, where the Kaladan multimodal project is going to be made, the Chabahar port, which India is operating in Iran. For the Chinese, the Gwadar port in Pakistan, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and Kyokphu in Myanmar form the part of string of pearls. And model border villages, that is, for example, Xiaokang. This along the LAC are being used to demographically assert sovereignty in these contested areas. So this China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is also a part of the One Belt, One Road initiative, is a part of the Chinese string of pearls policy. Next, regarding India, India is using the Quad, that is cooperation with US, Japan, and Australia to ensure that there is a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. What can be asked this year from the external state actors is probably Bangladesh in some or the other way, because Bangladesh, the problem of illegal Bangladeshi immigrants has been widely in news all across the elections of the country. And while the census is also taking place, and while they are being deported after the recent government change in West Bengal. So this has to be kept in mind. What is the current status? The political transition is still vulnerable in Bangladesh. The Awami League was collapsed, and there was a risk of anti-India sentiment after that. However, the problem is right now not very severe, but still the militants are now trying to increasingly use Bangladesh as a launch pad into India. Then escalated border standoffs, especially as the checkpost in West Bengal between India and Bangladesh, demographic stress and Aadhaar frauds that are helping illegal immigrants to cross over into India from Bangladesh. Then issues of drug trafficking, fake currency, etc. They are now the Bangladesh border of around 4,000 kilometers, which is the longest border India has with any country, has become a flashpoint in this issue. India's stand is again absolute sovereign right to repatriate. India has the absolute right to repatriate any citizen, illegal immigrant who is not a citizen of the country to their place of origin. Then zero tolerance for radical sanctuary. We are not going to give sanctuary to any radical elements who try to destabilize the country. The way forward again, which is happening right now, 6,000 kilometers smart border conversion. We're trying to convert this border into a smart border, basically using sensors and remote sensing equipment, etc., to ensure that the border is safe and under intense surveillance and monitoring. The example recently, land acquisition in border areas has been started by the West Bengal government. Then there is aggressive ground cleansing. Bordering states like West Bengal or Assam are rolling out targeted administrative drives to detect, delete from electoral rolls and legally hold these undocumented individuals prior to institutional deportation. And then predator deterrence, that is a unique tactical move. The BSF is exploring the feasibility of introducing apex predators like crocodiles and venomous snakes in vulnerable swampy river channels where physical fencing cannot be built. This could also have ecological consequences. It might lead to invasive alien species and the collapse of the ecosystem in the area. So it has to be done carefully. Then regarding Nepal, which also had a sort of an uprising where the earlier government was made to fall, and there was the Gen Z movement in Nepal, which led to the fall of the previous government and the establishment of a new government under Balen Shah. So Nepal was also in news, and the external state actor threat from Nepal also has to be analyzed. Again, with regard to the current status of the issue, India's stand on the issue and the way forward. So current status is the third country infiltration route. Nepal is actually the country through which most of the weapons, most of the illegal currency, the drugs, they are transported into India. Why? Because there is a highly porous border of India with Nepal. So this porous border, which does not have a clear either geographic marker and has a very transitional nature occurring in the plains, so it doesn't have a very secure perspective on doesn't have a very secure outlook, and it does not have that amount of surveillance in it, because there is free movement between India and Nepal. So that means that the border acts as a third country infiltration route, as it is an open border. Then China is expanding its footprint in Nepal. Beijing or China has now deepened its intelligence as well as its interference in the economic and military strategy of Nepal, and they are now having partnerships with Nepal's northern borders, and that has sunk India's traditional security depth in Nepal. So India, which had a strong strategic foothold in Nepal, Nepal used to be called India's diplomatic backyard. So it is no longer India's diplomatic backyard, as now China has also influenced the same country and is offering them great incentives to partner with them. Third, India's stand on it, that is non-negotiable border monitoring. India, whatever unique historical or cultural ties has with Nepal, the border has to be monitored in the most integrated and tech-friendly way. Then the security commitments should be reciprocal. Kathmandu or Nepal must take proactive, verifiable measures to prevent anti-India state and non-state actors to show and reflect their close friendship and honor the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with India. So, what is the way forward? Upgrading the SSB battalions, that is the Sashastra Seema Bal, which is the border force which guards the Nepal border. Their infrastructure, their logistics, their manpower, there has to be updated to ensure that they are more tech driven. Then mandatory biometric logging, registration for all third country individuals who cross into the land borders, removing the anonymity, along with a joint bilateral intelligence centers. So cooperation is the only way ahead with all of these countries, whatever the tension, the state of tension might be, but of cooperation and a peaceful neighborhood is going to lead to a peaceful South Asia and give prosperity to the whole economy and society of the region. Now, there are certain other spillover challenges which have to be understood from Myanmar, etc., and they can be easily derived from the PDF. Now, regarding terrorism, there are certain types of terrorism, and for that we have to first understand what is the definition of terrorism. When it comes to non-state actors, terrorism is basically an unlawful act of violence which is used to make people afraid, threaten common public and government by usually killing innocent civilians. So basically, terrorism involves killing innocent civilians to threaten the government and achieve political and economic objectives by certain groups. These groups are called terrorists. There are various types of terrorism which occur in India. Firstly is the state-sponsored terrorism by foreign governments who provide sanctuary, funding and training to the terrorists. For example, Pakistan's backing of Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. Next is the type of terrorism called ethno-nationalist terrorism, that is armed struggle for secession or ethnic dominance, that is happening in Khalistan, that is Punjab movement, as well as the Jammu and Kashmir insurgency and the Northeast. Next comes cyber terrorism, that is large scale disruption of digital networks to cause public fear. For example, something that happened in the Mumbai power grid attack in 2020 and the Kundakulam nuclear power plant attack in the last few years. Then narco-terrorism, that is fusion of drug trafficking with the terror networks, that is drugs being used to fund the terrorists. For example, in Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir, they finance almost 15% of all the militants' funding. Then there is another type of terrorism that has grown, that is the lone wolf kind of attacks, where there are single isolated highly trained militants or terrorists who attack the security forces or civilians in the country. Even the Pahalgam attack was an example of a lone wolf or that kind of an attack where only 3 or 4 people came and they attacked the civilians in a very surgically precise operation. So these are violent actions by self-radicalized individuals and they are outside organized command and structures. So regarding any of those attacks which happen in a rogue way, who are outside the command structures of any organization, these are the lone wolf attacks. Example is the Bangalore Rameshwaram Cafe blast in 2024. What we have to understand firstly is the threat matrix, so that we can have points ready made whenever the causes of these threats or the status of these threats is asked. For that, we can use terms like algorithmic radicalization, that is, terror networks are now exploiting social media to radicalize the youth. So, the agents of socialization have also now transformed or transgressed into the internet and the digital sphere. Next, digital financing, that is shifting from traditional banking to virtual digital assets, cryptocurrencies, private coins, and anonymous crowdfunding for terror operations. Next, the drone loop or the drone threat that happens, that is the proliferation of cheap commercial drones. It provides the adversaries with these low cost tools to drop weapons, contrabands, etc. So basically, the influx of cheap drones has allowed any such group to operate in a way so that a lot of economic investment is not needed to carry out this illegal infiltration of goods and arms into the other country, and it is also done in a very efficient way. Then using AI generated deepfakes to create instability and unrest within the population and to use it for propaganda, defamation, or spreading fear. And the use of overground workers, that is non-combatant individuals who are living normal civilian lives, who provide essential logistical support, ground intelligence, and extortion financing, and also help in recruitment of the youth. So again, here comes the Dovell doctrine in terms of the counter strategy. We spoke about this. Proactive defense. Examples of this are hot pursuit and surgical strikes. This was asked a few years back by UPSC. What are hot pursuit? Hot pursuit is immediate tactical tracking and engagement of fleeing terrorists across the borders, which happened in Uri. Then surgical strikes are highly targeted, precise military attacks to destroy specific assets. For example, in 2016, the surgical strikes happened, and then during Operation Sindoor. Then something called preemptive strikes, that is offensive actions to neutralize an imminent enemy threat before it attacks. And what happened during the second phase of Operation Sindoor, when the Pakistani Air Force bases and those infrastructure were targeted. Then covert operations, for example, that was shown in the movie Dhurandhar, that secret missions to achieve strategic goals without openly involving the state. So these are intelligence-led eliminations of the terror commanders that happened in the case of the unknown gunmen that is in news from time to time in Pakistan, which India does not claim officially, but is attributed to India's external security and intelligence agencies. Then certain mechanisms like diplomatic and legal mechanisms, FATF, use of laws like UAPA, empowering the National Investigation Agency to investigate. So these are the basic issues and way forwards in the case of terrorism and the role of internal and external non-state actors. Apart from terror groups, what a question that can be asked can be on the various left-wing extremism in the same vein, along with Maoism, narco-terrorism, separatism, etc. The issues and the way forward remain the same, even regarding the drug cartels, the narco-terrorists, the human traffickers. The way forward is also quite common. We always need a comprehensive approach. We need the convergence and collaboration between the agencies. We need to be preactive and not proactive. We have to be preemptive in our approach. We have to be proactive in our approach. We have to ensure that technology is well used for countering any of the threats, whether it is fake currency, whether it is cyber attacks. There has to be the common way forwards. They remain the same. If the question is on illegal immigrants, then it's the same. If it is on NGOs, piracy, whatever it is, the way forwards, they remain the same. In the long term, a published national security strategy is also needed. India must codify a public national security strategy, which was recommended by the Kargil Review Committee after the Kargil War, the Naresh Chandra Task Force, and the Defense Planning Committee to provide a unified strategic framework for internal security. Then we have to dismantle the OGW, overground workers network, systematically. For example, using NAD grid, that is the National Grid on Intelligence Infrastructure. So that has to be upgraded. State police intelligence has to be integrated with NII databases, and UAPA's individual designations should be powered aggressively and used aggressively against these OGWs. Then Counter-terrorism diplomacy has to be deepened. We have to put pressure on countries like Pakistan using international bodies such as the Financial Action Task Force, the IMF, etc. We have to ensure that we have bilateral treaties with various countries regarding money laundering, regarding terror financing, etc. And we have to leverage this economic and various kinds of treaties. For example, the Indus Water Treaty that was put in abeyance was a good way forward and a good step taken by the government. Then counter drone infrastructure or counter terror infrastructure should be highly technologically powered. This counter drone infrastructure has to be strengthened. Operation Sindoor, S-400, Barak 8, all these things, they were used. There was the total complete air border defense system. The air defense system of India was upgraded and now called Akash Tir. This is mostly based on indigenous technologies and has multi-level deterrence and defense mechanisms so that any such threat from the air, example used in Operation Sindoor, is neutralized. Then a digital counter narrative strategy is needed. Basically, the government needs to use the social media to carry out the real fact checking as well as to debunk or demystify any of the fake news or AI generated deep fakes. We have to monitor and deploy counter narrative in the quickest way so that we can ensure that no fake news is spread in the country and no propaganda and leads up to the radicalization and ultimate recruitment of individuals into the terror groups or the state and non-state actors. So we can use a diaspora for that. Leaders in UK, USA of the community of India, they can be used to counter the threats that are occurring in those external states such as Canada, such as China, such as Pakistan. So that can be used as a good way forward. So all these various types of threats, they have to be understood and they have to be inculcated while opening up the dimensions, the multiple dimensions of the non-state actors as well as the external state actors within the country. And for each of them, for example, in the non-state actors, if the question is on narco-terrorists, if the question is on human trafficking, if the question is on fake currency networks, the common points will remain the same. The data might change, the sources might change, but the causes almost remain the same. There is the basic cause of governance deficit, there is the basic cause of radicalization, and then the fertile ground provided by poverty and unemployment. And the way forward is again all about ensuring that there is lack of governance deficit, and then there is a two-track action along the military front, along the intelligence front, and the diplomacy front, along with winning the hearts and minds of the citizens of the country. If there is greater social cohesion within the community, within the society, internal security threats from these external state and non-state actors will definitely reduce. So all the data and facts can be taken from the PDF, and the conceptual understanding, as we discussed in the beginning of the lecture, forms the base of internal security topics as we move on forward. So we'll see you in the next class where we'll cover the rest of the remaining topics, and then we have to ensure that you have enough time to revise it and reproduce it so that there is a clear better improvement in the marks that you will gain from the subject. The questions are not that dynamic. They are from very set specific themes and they have good specific answers, provided that you use certain keywords which have an academic backing, like whatever doctrine, deterrence, nuclear strategy, security strategy, that can be utilized for your answers. So thank you so much. We'll see you in the next class.